Thank you for the opportunity to, and I'm making my timer, to testify at this hearing, which is obviously especially well-timed and I think urgently needed this year. I'm going to dive in and out of the testimony that I submitted in an effort to also address some issues that Mr. Zemsky brought up. In the name of promoting economic development and job creation, the state has significantly expanded taxpayer-funded subsidies to private businesses and developers, and to the numerous contractors, consultants, labor unions, and others who benefit from such funded projects. In particular, to expedite its most highly touted high-tech mega projects, the state under Governor Cuomo has taken the additional and unprecedented step of financing, building, and equipping factories for private companies through unaccountable, off-budget, quasi-public nonprofit development corporations controlled by the SUNY Polytechnic Institute's colleges of nanoscale science and engineering. I'm going to argue that state construction and continuing ownership of factories on behalf of private businesses creates additional financial risks for taxpayers and is an inappropriate use of public funds. Also unprecedented is a projected level of spending for these and similar purposes. In 2017, on-budget disbursements for economic development are projected to increase by $844 million, more than doubling the previous year's figure. Between 2017 and 2021, ESD is expected to spend more than $6.6 billion on such programs, with roughly three-quarters of the money coming from backdoor borrowing that has to be paid back by taxpayers. In addition, some large but unknown portion of the $1.5 billion discretionary capital fund known as the State Municipal Facilities Program is also being divvied up through the Dormitory Authority for other projects that purport to create jobs and promote economic development. And of course, last but not least, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year, which over the next few years will come to billions of dollars on various tax credits and subsidies, the largest of which is the film and TV credit. Now, a highly publicized federal investigation focused initially on the Buffalo Billion and related projects has cast a pall of alleged corruption over the state's economic development programs. However, quite apart from whether this probe uncovers any official wrongdoing or misconduct, it's time to confront a very basic question about the state's increasingly costly approach to economic development. What are we getting for all this money? In some cases, the results have become painfully obvious. You've got a shuttered Muller Quaker Dairy plant in Batavia. You have an empty so-called film hub in Syracuse. We've just seen a mysterious halt to construction of a computer chip manufacturing facility in Albany. And of course, in the case of Startup New York, you've got a grand total of 408 jobs, or perhaps, then again, 332.
Less.
Less. But look, when it comes to Startup New York, I would say, and here I'm more in agreement with Mr. Zemsky, there is a silver lining. Since the program is not actually accomplishing much, it doesn't actually cost you very much. In fact, it costs you practically nothing beyond the amount that's been spent on marketing, which, I would remind you, came from another magic piggy bank known as the State Power Authority, whose purpose is to provide low-cost energy and power for economic development. Nonetheless, despite its financial insignificance, Startup New York has really captured the imagination of the public and obviously of you as its representatives, I think because it exemplifies two nagging features of our increasingly costly economic development model. It overpromises and it underdelivers. Fewer than half of the 107 initial participating firms in startup are true startups. That's according to the report you were citing. In a normally functioning free enterprise system, I'd remind you, many, if not most companies that are startups can be expected to fail within a few years, contributing to the cycle of creative destruction essential to growth and progress in our economy. So even the current modest job creation projections for these firms are probably unlikely to be met. That's the way it goes. I do sympathize with Mr. Zemsky's frustration with the fixation on startup, to tell you the truth. It has been widely misconstrued and misadvertised as a grand strategy when it's really more of a tactic. As Mr. Zemsky said, it's a tool. I would suggest to you that using that metaphor, this is not a hammer or a power drill or an adjustable wrench. It's more like one of those tiny Phillips head screwdrivers you use to adjust the screw on your glasses. It comes in really handy when you need it, but it's not very useful when you're looking to build a new wing on the house. Far more troubling, and in conclusion, by the way, I'm not sure that if you completely eliminated startup, you would actually be helping yourself. I think startup is largely a victim of the perceptions created by the hype surrounding it, and also by the failure to adequately and accurately report on its results. A far bigger problem and far more troubling because of its size and scope is the model used by the Cuomo administration to advance the mega projects that figure prominently in the so-called Upstate Revitalization Initiative, starting with the Solar City factory. In a recent report co-published by the Empire Center, the former ESD senior official John Batchelor cited a number of problems and shortcomings with this project, and we provided in our endnotes a link to that study John wrote. His key findings: taxpayers will be exposed to an unusually high degree of risk by the structure of this project, that the net employment impact, to the extent you can put a finger on it, has been greatly overstated and has now been adjusted to include jobs that will be created in sales and marketing, jobs that would exist even if the Solar City factory was built somewhere else, assuming Solar City expanded. The relationship between the College of Nanoscale Sciences and the Fort Schuyler Management Corp, its subsidiary, and Empire State Development leaves a number of open questions. It lacks fundamental mechanisms to ensure transparency and accountability, and I think you should find it remarkable that the head of the principal state economic development agency just came before you here and professed to be unaware of details of this project. That speaks volumes. In addition, the structure of the Buffalo deal and similar upstate projects vests far too much discretion in key officials of SUNY Poly and the executive chamber. In fact, as the Empire Center first reported in May, Fort Schuyler Management appears to have violated state law by requiring Solar City contractors to enter into a project labor agreement with local unions without first conducting the required due diligence study to determine whether a PLA would actually save money. We foiled them, we inquired again. They say they have no such record, which leads us to conclude that they simply violated the law. What we know about the Buffalo Billion projects is that's the need for several immediate reforms, whether directed by you or undertaken by the administration. The state should begin to unwind existing agreements between SUNY Poly subsidiaries and parties to ongoing projects, get ESD back in the lead, and establish a more normal relationship where these projects have started. Disband these subsidiaries once you have unwound them to the extent legally necessary from these deals, and prohibit the future creation of any similar development entities by SUNY or any other arm of government that would be interposed between your funding, if you even do any, which is another question. These are the minimum steps necessary to boost transparency and accountability, but more needs to be done. I could conclude right here by recommending that you adopt a comprehensive system of rigorous, regularly updated, and fully publicized performance measures for all of these programs. Obviously, the needs here can be summed up as you need more transparency, more accountability, more openness on every level. That would mark an improvement over the current situation, but really you need to go much further. It's time to much more closely scrutinize the entire overblown premise of the state's economic development programs. Let's recognize, for starters, that in the words of economist Larry Summers, government is a crappy venture capitalist. Cutting-edge technologies may be cool and exciting, offering the promise of the next big thing, but Albany has no business betting our money on them. In Buffalo, nonetheless, we've effectively become partners with the famous prominent billionaire and entrepreneur Elon Musk in a money-losing enterprise that has never run a large-scale manufacturing facility. The Musk business empire has been kept afloat with some decidedly unconventional financial engineering, as the Wall Street Journal recently reported. The just-announced merger of Solar City and Tesla Motors has drawn decidedly mixed reviews from financial analysts. If the deal succeeds, well, good for Mr. Musk and his shareholders. If it doesn't, well, the taxpayers of New York will still hold the keys to the world's largest, most advanced empty solar panel factory. Whether they involve financing an enormous, complex $750 million manufacturing plant, or at the other extreme, distributing 5- and 6-figure grants to seemingly endless parade of craft breweries, farm distilleries, ice cream shops, and other trendy micro-enterprises all over upstate New York, government economic development programs are no substitute for a better business climate. And I think that you acknowledged that in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, more often than not, economic development programs actually serve to distract attention from the state's failure to improve that climate. Now, you pointed to the dichotomy between the desire to promote the state's good things and the need to recognize what needs to be improved. It's understandable Mr. Zemsky sees his role as that of a cheerleader. That kind of goes with the territory. But in any contest, the cheerleaders, as well as cheerleaders, there have to be coaches who recognize whether the game plan is working. You're in the role of the coaches there. And I would submit to you that with all due respect, some of the ways Mr. Zemsky characterized the economic performance of the state, particularly upstate New York, were inaccurate, not supported by the data. There has not been a quote-unquote dramatic improvement in the economy of upstate New York. The unemployment gains are due largely, virtually entirely, to a decline in the labor force. Most areas of upstate New York had no job gains last year and have had no job gains in the latest 12-month period. There's a lot that needs to happen. And now it's not necessarily even blamable on on the state's economic development programs. It's a big, complex picture. I do think the legislature and the governor deserve credit for taking solid, positive steps to improve the climate, the tax changes you made, the corporate tax cuts in general, which were broad-based, importantly, and the complete elimination of taxes on incorporated manufacturers, which oddly seems not to be promoted by the state much at all, were good. The estate tax reform was extremely valuable to many numerous small businesses and small farms. Still needs further work, by the way. And last but not least, the property tax cap is a truly important fundamental structural reform that has saved businesses and homeowners billions of dollars and can do much more in the future. That's extremely important. But taxes are not the only obstacle to a stronger economy in New York. Their businesses are deterred by high costs in other categories. Our energy rates, already among the nation's highest, will be boosted into the stratosphere by the so-called clean energy standard adopted just this week by the Public Service Commission. Indeed, this plan might be called the biggest, it probably will turn out to be one of the largest tax increases in effect in New York State's history, just enacted by the Public Service Commission. Our average workers' compensation insurance premium was already the fourth highest in the country, 48% above the median of other state averages, even before a recent 9.3% rate boost. Why'd the rates go up? Because there has not been sufficient reform of the program to justify rates going down. The State Environmental Quality Review Act continues to add needless red tape, delays, and uncertainty to needed private development projects around the state. Now, while Mr. Zemsky has suggested that startup is generating a positive buzz in the business community, the state's also sending much more negative signals with other high-profile actions, including the increase in the minimum wage to as high as $15 an hour and the nation's most generous paid family leave plan. The recent denial on spurious grounds of a required water quality permit for the Constitution gas pipeline in the southern tier threatens to deeply and negatively impact prospects for economic growth in what was already a struggling region of the state. I'd point out, by the way, that the Dick's Sporting Good Warehouse will create less than half the number of jobs that the Binghamton area has lost in the last year. With its focus on job creation, commerce, and industry, this committee can take the lead in scrutinizing and calling attention to the economically harmful impacts of some of the recent policy changes I've just outlined. In the past, the governor and the legislature have spent vast amounts of financial capital, backed by taxpayers, in the name of, quote-unquote, economic development. Truly effective policies to promote economic growth will demand something more difficult. It will demand a greater expenditure of political capital on needed regulatory reforms and tax relief. And with that, I'll conclude my testimony and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, E.J. Let me just go back to something you said, and I think you scratched your head while you said it, and I've been scratching my head as I've been hearing it, that in regard to the so-called Riverbend / Solar City, once called Salivo project, there at one time was a commitment written, apparently written, between the company and somebody with the state, which committed the company to factory jobs totaling something like 1,500. Now I read that the commitment is down to 500. So there must have been, as Mr. Walter indicated, various changes to the agreement. That agreement, I think, is between SUNY Poly, right? And Salivo, or the successor
Yes.
company,
Yeah,
Solar
not with
City, and
ESD.
maybe Tesla.
Right.
Should we have had SUNY Poly come in and testify?
Well, probably you should have. I'm not sure you would have learned more. That was one of the issues cited by John Batchelor in his report that we co-published about a month ago, which was that the line of accountability for enforcing these job quotas is now hopelessly blurred because it's such an unusual setup. You know, going back from that question you just asked about job counts to the bigger picture, this is a fundamental problem with all economic development. Economic development programs inevitably, and you have more experience than anybody in the state in dealing with these, they all come down to somebody has to promise to create jobs. Have you ever met anybody who went into business with the goal of creating jobs? Really? People go into business with the goal of building a better mousetrap and making money, and jobs are the byproduct, principally, of a successful business. Trying to pin down any business on a job creation promise, you and I both know that what ultimately happens is in a back room somewhere or on the 50th floor at some of the largest corporations you're dealing with, somebody says, well, how many jobs can we promise to create out of that? What's the typical ratio? They make their best guess. These types of numbers are notoriously difficult to pin down. It doesn't take deliberate deception to find out that your job targets are moving all over the place. Because companies don't aim to employ, companies aim to make a profit. And that's really the fundamental problem with all of these economic development programs, because I don't know whether there's any deliberate effort to deceive or sloppiness in the Solar City project. Remember, again, as I pointed out, and this is published, it's been noted in their SEC filings, this company has never run a large-scale manufacturing facility. How does it know how many people it will employ? It has no experience doing it. It still hasn't done it. So it may be promising in the view of Mr. Zemsky, for instance, but our money is being put into this. And frankly, it was probably an honest miscalculation that's been continuously changed. But then in order to keep the number at 5,000, direct and indirect, they had to change the nature of the job. So they're now counting, as John Batchelor put it, the guy who comes in, who stops you as you're entering Home Depot and asks you if you're interested in having solar panels. That's one of the jobs.
Sales and installers.
Right.
And those do not necessarily have to be, in the grand scheme of things, Solar City made in Buffalo panels. You
Well,
could
the
have
plant could be in Pennsylvania or Arizona.
Or China.
And if,
Yeah.
if the company is succeeding in line with its hopes, that job will be created.
And that is why I think that whatever this agreement is between the company and, I guess, SUNY Poly, should specify, and I think it did specify at one time, manufacturing jobs at the factory.
Right.
That's what the comparison should be with. And it's my understanding that there is a penalty provision, or at least there had been at one time a penalty provision. If the company fails to meet the target, then there is a payback.
Some clawback.
Something more than the $1 a year rental that they'll be paying.
But, and I agree, I think all of these concerns I think that your concerns go to the points that are the most important points on this project. I would like to stress again that what my fundamental point of view is, that as I tried to wrap up, is I'm not sure you shouldn't be standing back and resetting and putting a halt to all of this. That is, you can't put a halt to Solar City now. You're too far down the road, and some of these other projects. But this has all gotten way out of hand. And really, it's more difficult. It's going to be, I would acknowledge right up front, much more difficult politically for you to tackle workers' comp reform and energy rates and try to figure out and understand what the PSC just did to the economy of New York. But those things are more important than these economic development programs, which at best, as again, I think you acknowledge, these things, and I think Assemblyman Walter, you noted, these are marginal, these have a marginal, in fact, I think Mr. Zemsky pointed out, you got 8 million jobs and $1.5 trillion economy. These programs actually have a marginal impact even when they're as bloated as they've become.